Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's BIA webinar on AMR New Horizons. So I'm delighted today to be able to share with you some of the solutions to the threat of antimicrobial resistance. My name's Sue Charles. I'm a life sciences consultant and I've been in the life sciences industry for over 30 years now. But today I'm here as a founding member of the WHO Task Force of AMR Survivors. We launched our campaign yesterday, so I'm going to start this webinar by sharing with you what the WA Task Force is about and some of our goals and how everyone can join in with the campaign. It's also, yesterday was a very important day when the UK launched its new national plan, the next 5-year plan for confronting AMR. So the speakers on today's panel will be able to share their insights into that as well. So we have today joining me later 4 people on the panel from the various aspects of the industry. So we have John Alter from the AMR Action Fund, Nick Crabb from NICE, Beverly Isherwood from Medicines Discovery Catapult, and the PACE programme, of which they are a key member, and Deborah, who's going to be sharing her insights from the innovator, CEO, entrepreneur perspective. So let me just frame today's webinar. I'm sure everyone is aware of the issue of AMR, but whether everyone's aware of the scale of the potential impact of AMR and the end of the antibiotic age. The United Nations has estimated that by 2050, there will be as many deaths by drug-resistant superbugs as there are from cancer. And I think if we all look around the awareness of cancer and the actions that are being taken to come up with new therapies and treatments and diagnostics for cancer, the two just don't compare. And I think that's why we're all here to try and raise the awareness of AMR in order to drive forward solutions through all sorts of initiatives that are being taken. So those initiatives broadly fall into 3 groups. What we call the nudge initiative. These are actions to help change behaviour, everyone's behaviour. Everyone can contribute to the solution to the AMR problem. To minimise resistance, to inspire innovation, to reward success. And that really includes increasing public awareness of the challenge ahead and how changes in behaviour through patient stories can help address the issues. And that's the objective of the WHO task force that I'm here to talk about today. There's also all the pull initiatives, and they really fall into the category of innovative reimbursement models to change the whole risk-reward profile and encourage more companies to be able to invest and innovate. And then those are the push initiatives. What are the funding streams that can push forward new innovation from biotechs and their investors to invest in R&D to identify new therapies and game-changing diagnostics. And the panel will talk about all of these aspects of AMR today. So quickly, just to touch on the new National Action Plan that was launched yesterday. We haven't had a huge amount of time to absorb the plan, but it really reflects what I've just said. So the actions fall into sort of 3 and 4 buckets. So reducing the need for and the unintentional exposure to antimicrobials. And that's not just about human health, that's the whole One Health model. Also to optimise the use of antimicrobials, invest in innovation, and look at the supply and access to innovative and existing antimicrobials. And as part of the UK's action plan, obviously be a good global partner as part of the whole AMR diplomacy. And in terms of the AMR diplomacy, that's really driving towards the next United Nations General Assembly high-level meeting on AMR, which is September. So against that backdrop of this meeting later in the year, there's a lot of initiatives that are being formed that are driving forward their campaigns. And those were just an example of a few of them. So I'm here today to talk about the WHO Task Force of AMR Survivors, to which I am honoured to be a founding member. We got together as a task force last year. We comprised 12 members, 12 founding members from across the globe, who have been brought together as either people who individually have survived AMR infections, or have cared for someone who has had serious drug-resistant infections, and I fall into that latter category. So our goal is to bring that human face to the AMR issue, to help demonstrate that AMR is a problem here and now. It's not something we can kick down the road in the distant future, to really bring advocacy through a patient-centric approach and a people-centric approach, and making the AMR issue visible, in particular amongst policyholders, because it's really through change of policy that in the future will make a huge difference. So our task force has a 5-point plan, but sort of top of that plan is telling survivor stories and doing that through a range of initiatives such as events. So I really thank BIA for putting on today's webinar to allow me to introduce you to the WHO Task Force of AMR survivors, but a whole range of other events, discussions, awareness, advocacy, and developing the framework of what do we actually not just talk about, but what do we need to do? What action can we take? Where are the priority areas? We had our inaugural meeting in Geneva last October, and from that meeting, we really put our action plan together, which has led to yesterday the launch of our campaign, which is called AMR is Invisible, I Am Not. And I think that really sums it up. You know, to a lot of people, they don't know what AMR means, but the issue of AMR is invisible. It's nowhere near as visible as cancer and other health issues. But individuals who've suffered from AMR or cared for people with AMR or who've had relatives or friends die of AMR, they can tell the stories and bring the issue to life. And that's really what our campaign is about. Storytelling and making real life stories and the face of people that can tell those stories. So we have a series of events, calendars, leaflets, campaigns, videos that will be rolled out over this year and next year. So do look out for those, and if I can encourage you to follow our initiative, thank you very much. So briefly before I lead to the panel, I said it's about storytelling, so let me just tell you my story. So my story relates to my mother. She was 81 during the beginning of COVID. She unfortunately has a chronic, non-reversible lung condition, genetic condition, that means she has COPD, and as she entered COVID was on oxygen at home. So she was in the high-risk group, and during COVID was hospitalised 4 times, actually not with COVID, but through deep lung infections. And on 2 of those occasions, she had Pseudomonas infections, and on the second occasion, the Pseudomonas infection became resistant to even not just the first line, but the second line of antibiotics. And when I was invited into the hospital in the evening to visit her, when hospital visits were only allowed at end of life, I think we were, both pretty much knew this Pseudomonas infection could be the one that might see her off. Well, luckily, the clinician in the hospital managed to find a 3rd line antibiotic, IV antibiotic that worked. She survived. She's now thriving. She lived to see her 90th birthday. She lived to see her great-granddaughter born. And actually, she's completely off her oxygen now through a decision that was taken that in her case, long-term antibiotics for life is the way that she could best avoid future infections. So whilst there was the negative side of the drug-resistant infections, the positive side is that day to day, she now takes antibiotics 3 times a week, and that's keeping her alive. It's keeping her off the oxygen. She can walk, she can go out to the shop, she can have a full life. But both of us are living with the fact that we know one day she may become, the infection that she has may become resistant to those antibiotics, and the options are running out. So that's what drove me, even though I've been in the life science sector for 3 decades, to join the WHO task force to bring these survivor stories to life, because I want to make sure that we have a future that isn't the end of the antimicrobial age, that people in the future, like my mum, have antibiotics to be able to treat their infections. So that's the end of my story. That's the end of the overview of the WHO task force. I'm now going to invite our panelists one by one to give you a few minutes overview of their perspective, the role they're playing in New Horizons and new updates. So I'm going to pass first to Deborah.
Thanks very much, Sue, and it's an absolute pleasure to be part of this event and be on the panel today. So just introducing myself and the role of the company that I lead in the AMR space. So I'm the founder and CEO of Novobartics, a drug discovery and development company looking at immunology-based solutions for not just bacterial, but also fungal infections as well. So I guess from my own perspective, leading a company, I've been through the journey from innovation through the drug development process, in, as we'll discuss a little bit later, what remains a challenging space. But I want to start off really with the good news today, and that's the fact that there is innovation in the AMR space. And interestingly, it's companies like Novobartics, it's the small to medium enterprises that are driving R&D in the AMR space. And these kinds of entities hold around 80% of current products in development, according to WHO data from 2021. That won't have changed much. And interestingly, around 40%, just over, of the therapies in development at different stages in the life cycle, from invention through to preclinical and clinical development, are novel classes, so new types of molecules and solutions against infection, and importantly, drug-resistant infection. So I think those are the positives. There are a number of companies working on therapeutic solutions for infections for the future. I think looking further down the slide at the bottom left-hand side, you'll see that most of those assets that these SMEs hold are still in the preclinical space, but there are a number that are already in clinical development, so further towards patients, which is important as well. And the numbers that the WHO published in 2021, you'll see that, you know, there's over 120 commercial as well as academic groups developing over 200 antibacterial agents or programs in the preclinical stage of development, and 77 compounds or programs already at the clinical stage. So I think that's the good news. There is activity, there is innovation, there's R&D in this space. The more, the better, obviously, but that's a positive. And I think the challenge is translating that innovation, those ideas, those potential new solutions to add to the toolbox that we desperately need to refill against AMR, and develop those for the future, translate that into potential new drugs for the molecules, the solutions that do end up going through R&D positively. So the attractive looking assets in that space, we need to make sure that they eventually see the light of day and patients can have access to those. And this is the problem that Sue touched on around the broken market, and we'll hear from the panel on this in terms of the need to have what we call push and pull incentives to encourage more discovery in this space, and to make sure that the companies, the groups who are developing these much needed solutions against AMR can continue, can thrive, and that we do see innovation eventually at some stage turning into drugs. And just before I hand back to Sue and the rest of the panel, I touched on the fact that I think what's exciting is innovation in this space is looking at these new classes of potential drugs against AMR, and the focus there being modalities that mitigate future resistance as much as possible, rather than focusing on the same classes of antibacterials that we've all been exposed to for so long. So that's quite exciting as well. We're finding the pathways in terms of the development required for these new entities, but I think that's a particularly exciting aspect. And I'm sure a lot of people with us today will have heard of things such as phage, and we've got, you know, some peptide, new classes of immunomodulators, so solutions against AMR that work in different ways than the drugs that we're currently employing to combat this. So I think that's very exciting as well. So lots of positives in this space, lots of innovation. We need to see that coming through, being translated into drugs and overcoming the challenges to do so. So I'll hand back to you and the rest of the panel, and I think Bev next. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so I think it's really exciting. Thank you, Deborah, for that overview of 200 and odd new compounds coming through. But really, if you think of the failure rate as we go through pipelines, that's not enough. So I think Bev's going to talk to us. I'm going to turn the slide up now. Bev's going to talk to us about some new initiatives. What are we doing to drive more innovation into the pipeline? So at this point, I'll hand over to yourself, Bev.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks, Deb, as well, for that overview. It's great to be here today with everybody on the call. I'm here talking to you from the Medicines Discovery Catapult. We're part of the UK's national innovation infrastructure, and we're here to support sector growth in medicines discovery. And a key focus of ours is supporting that very early stage innovation that's happening in academic labs and SMEs that Deb described. And there is a huge amount of real novel innovation there, and those ideas and projects really deserve that support and that focused support, especially in this area of AMR. The role the Catapult plays in this is to help convene and collaborate with the sector, cross-sector initiatives to help bring additional push funding to help incentivize R&D and to help provide support to progress these really early stage projects that can then be taken on. Together with the CF Trust, the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, and LifeArc, we operate the CF AMR Syndicate in this place. And then most recently, we also, together with LifeArc and Innovate UK, launched the PACE initiative towards the end of last year, which is a £30 million initiative really focused on supporting that early stage innovation required to try and get ahead of AMR. And I think it's just reflecting on something that Deb said around what that early stage pipeline and portfolio looks like. From our first funding round, which is live now, we received a huge response to that funding round. There were over 170 expressions of interest to that round for new antibacterials across 34 countries globally. But a huge number of the projects there were progressing against novel targets, novel mode of actions, phage, peptides, antibodies, complex medicines. So there's a really exciting early pipeline for PACE. And for us, it's not just about funding and running. It's really about fund and support and helping to provide that broader support to help ensure these promising molecules are advanced as fast as they can in the best way they can, directed towards the largest unmet patient needs. And that involves convening that broader community, people who've been affected by AMR, clinicians, academics, the regulators, all of that to help progress those projects in the best way. I think the other key role for push funding initiatives in this space is really around capacity building and workforce strengthening. Because of this broken market that we've discussed already on the call today, there's a slowdown in industry, and so what we're seeing are fewer really experienced AMR drug discoverers in that space. And actually there was a recent report out by the AMR Industry Alliance earlier this year that estimated the numbers of AMR R&D professionals in the sector, and they've estimated that at around 3,000 globally versus an equivalent number of around 45,000 R&D professionals in the cancer space. So it's really important that these push incentives are also helping to nurture and strengthen and grow that human capital, as well as the research funding and the wraparound support for projects, ultimately with the aim of helping to de-risk these early programs so that other onward investment can be made by other push incentives. And there's been great strides made from some large push initiatives, CARB-X being one of them in the space. John, I know will talk to us more about AMR Action Fund as well, and then ultimately the pull incentives as well to help progress this new suite of more targeted medicines and diagnostics towards the people that need them faster. So yeah, that's a bit about me and push funding. I think I'll hand back to Sue at this point.
Thank you very much. Excellent. So, and if I can just, I can see a couple of questions coming in. I was going to prompt the audience to say, you know, as we're talking through, do jot down your questions. You know, we very much want to have a discussion after the various panel members have presented. So thank you for submitting a couple already. So now we're going to move on to John from AMR Action Fund, who is going to talk about his exciting source of funding, which I'll pass over to you, John.
Yep. Thank you, Sue. And as both, Deb and Bev have said, science is not really the issue. It's an problem of economics and the broken marketplace that has caused the pipeline to be dwindling. And so for those that don't know about the AMR Action Fund, it was created back in 2020 through collaborative discussions between the WHO, the Wellcome Trust, some other foundations, as well as industry, being led by both IFPMA and the individual kind of market trade associations. And so the fund invests primarily in late stage clinical development companies, because that's been the real pinch point in terms of getting access to the capital needed to fund and execute the clinical trials. We will invest in antibiotics, antifungals. One of our portfolio companies is a diagnostics company, because diagnostics clearly has a role to play in the fight against AMR. We invest in both traditional molecules, so beta-lactam, beta-lactamase inhibitors. We will invest in non-traditional, so someone mentioned phage technology. One of our portfolio companies is a phage technology. In addition to the investments, we also advocate for market reforms to better value these antibiotics, and we certainly applaud the efforts of NICE and the NHS England in the work that they've done, and I know Nick is going to talk more about that. And then lastly, what some folks might not expect a fund to do is we do nudge, to use that word. We like to raise public awareness. And most recently, we had partnered with BBC Storyworks to produce a film called The Race Against Resistance. It profiles two patients. One of them is included on the Survivors Task Force, Sue, that's Tori Kinnaman. But it also focuses on some of the drug developers and clinicians and caregivers, because storytelling is so important to help break down such a complex topic as AMR. And so we likewise try to contribute to raising awareness. And we also will, author opinion pieces that appear in different publications and things, again, just to help get the word out and get policymakers more focused on this. So with that, I'll pause my opening remarks and turn it back to you, Sue.
Thank you very much. So that's really encouraging to hear about some of the companies and initiatives that you're investing in. So our last speaker on the panel today is going to be Nick Crabb, and he'll probably speak for a little longer, as he's going to have the opportunity to tell us very exciting news of the pilot studies that NICE and the NHS have been running on reimbursement, and the update from yesterday's launched initiatives. They were very pleased that our webinar is today rather than the day before yesterday, because it gives you the opportunity to tell us all about it, Nick. So please, I'm sure everyone's very excited to hear.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me to be on this panel. So just a very quick reminder of what we sort of set out to do. And NICE has been working very closely with the Department for Health and Social Care and NHS England on this work for several years now. So the basic concept is to determine the value of antimicrobials, their full public health value, and then to pay for that full public health value in a subscription contract, which therefore sort of means that there's sort of stable revenues irrespective of how much is actually used. And there's also full incentives for very robust stewardship. So in a nutshell, that was the sort of concept. And what I thought I'd do is very quickly run through what we did on the England subscription model pilots, and then reflect a little bit on the learning from those pilots, and then the new arrangements that we consulted on last summer. And then I will provide a sort of very quick update on sort of the next steps. So the England subscription model pilots, what we did there was we sort of developed selection criteria and a scoring framework, and we used those just to select 2 products for the pilot. We set a maximum contract value for each product that was designed to reflect England's fair share of an effective global pull incentive. And the figures we used were sort of 10 million per annum for up to 10 years. We then evaluated 2 antimicrobials, ceftazidime with avibactam and cefiderocol, and we used a bespoke HTA process. And what we set out to do there was to estimate the sort of incremental net health benefit measured in sort of quality adjusted life years. And within the sort of bespoke framework, we sort of captured the public health benefits beyond the sort of value that's normally included in HTA evaluation. We also created a model contract that delinks the payments from volumes and includes key performance indicators for things like surety of supply, good stewardship, manufacturing environmental practices, as well as surveillance for emerging resistance. We agreed contracts that delink the payments from volume used, guaranteeing a fixed annual payment for the companies. And we published the NICE guidance on the evaluation and valuation of these products in April 22, and the final subscription contracts came into force in July of the same year. So we've had these contracts running now for a sort of couple of years. Now, as soon as we got those contracts over the line, we started working on, what's the learning that we took from the pilot, and how can we use that learning to define ongoing arrangements for the sort of purchase of antimicrobials. So I think the first bit of learning was that it was really important that in those pilots we attempted to quantitatively capture that incremental net health benefit in quality adjusted life years. And the reason that was so important was that it meant that our work was anchored in the quantitative health economics that are very widely used by NICE and the UK health system. But it was very clear that for antibiotics, quantitative incremental net health benefit estimation in that way is really difficult and inevitably subject to relatively high uncertainty and also very resource intensive. But something we learned from having done that was that the estimated quality gains for both products were sufficient to justify payments at England's fair share levels. So the products were clearly worth that 10 million per annum for up to 10 years. In fact, both products delivered quality adjusted life years at below £20,000 per quality, which meets NICE's normal expectations of cost effectiveness. And because through having done that, and it was very difficult, but through having done that, we had these estimates, we believed that it was therefore possible, knowing that they were sort of providing the necessary value, that a more pragmatic approach could be applied to the determination of value in the sort of routine arrangements for the evaluation and purchase of antimicrobials. So based on those learnings and lots of other more detailed learnings, of course, we devised a sort of scheme for sort of ongoing arrangements for the evaluation and purchase of antimicrobials, and we consulted on that, and we consulted on these proposals, and that was in this case not just England, but for a UK-wide subscription model built on that pilot learning. So compared to the pilots, a few things changed. So the first thing was that the estimates of sort of these quality adjusted life year gains from the pilots indicated that the value of some of the products was likely to be higher than the maximum contract value we used in the pilots. So in the consultation proposals, a maximum value of 20 million per annum was proposed. Also, instead of undertaking the very complex quantitative health economic evaluation of every individual eligible antimicrobial, the contract payments will be based on a clinical award criteria with a points-based scoring system that was derived from the learning from the pilots. The award criteria are designed to reflect a broad range of value that an antimicrobial could offer health systems in the UK and globally. And all of this will be administered by NHS England through a sort of procurement process. And the NHS authorities have commissioned NICE to establish an antimicrobial evaluation panel, which will ensure that the product assessment includes the relevant expertise to assess products against these reward criteria. And this antimicrobial evaluation panel will place an eligible product into one of 4 value bands. And those bands will pay 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, or 20 million pounds per annum for up to an absolute maximum of 15 years. And another important feature is that as evidence emerges over time, it may be possible to re-evaluate a product, which could result in a change to the assigned value band, and that change could be in either sort of direction. So that was what we went out to consult on in the summer and sort of autumn last year. Now, as Sue said, this was very well timed, and there were some quite important announcements yesterday. So firstly, the DHSC published the National Action Plan for AMR, and that includes a commitment for the NHS, with support from NICE, to expand the antimicrobial product subscription model to more products and also to other nations of the UK. The NHS England has also published a sort of summary of responses to the consultation in the summer and autumn last year, and also a guidance document on the subscription model. And the next steps are that the NHS England will be publishing a sort of prior information notice very shortly, and that will include an 8-week pre-market engagement period before the procurement itself goes live. And then the contract notice for the procurement itself will follow later in the summer. So I think we are now very, very close to not only having the pilots up and running and demonstrating that the approach can work, but we're very, very close now to ongoing arrangements for the subscription models. I'll stop there and hand back to Sue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's very exciting to hear. So I think that's sort of the end of our initial comments. So very much if people in the audience can pose questions. And I've actually got one question, which I think I'll take first before we move on to something else, because perhaps it is an area that we've overlooked a little bit in the panel today. And that is a question directed to John, if John could be ready to answer. which is how much innovation and funding is going into the diagnostics area as opposed to the therapeutics area, because I think we all probably recognise that if you can diagnose the infection and its AMR status more quickly. So the question is, what investment's going in, and how will that drive the adoption of newer technologies rather than the sort of traditional blood culture in terms of the more rapid technologies? So perhaps, John, you could say a few words on diagnostics as opposed to therapeutics.
Yes. So as I mentioned, one of the companies that we have invested in, so we currently have 7, so it's 1 out of 7. I think, again, the kind of rule, though, that we look for when we're investing in companies, so we don't invest in a company like GSK, because GSK access to the capital markets. We are typically investing in the small biotech companies that would struggle to get access to capital. And in the same vein, there are some very large diagnostic global players around the world, and I know they are also looking at and investing. I think the diagnostics, to some degree, suffer their own broken marketplace, that at times it gets to be challenging to, let's say, have a $50 diagnostic that will tell you, yep, you can go ahead and use this $5 antibiotic. And so reimbursement or getting health systems to pay for that diagnostic test has led a little bit to the frustration there, and perhaps why there hasn't been as much investment. I think the other thing that we look at is really what can be provide a big change to the status quo, right? And part of that just goes back to basic microbiology, but people saw for sure during COVID to have a kind of rapid test or at some point of care test, it would be, very big, as opposed to having to send a sample off to a lab where it can take hours, sometimes days, to get that. Because again, sometimes the infection is not necessarily at a large urban hospital. Sometimes it's in a more remote section of the world, which could take longer. So that's just a few kind of perspectives or comments I can add about diagnostics.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, sorry, Beverly, please go ahead.
So yeah, if I could join in and add into that, I agree here as well that there is a need for more investment in the diagnostic space, especially given the fact that we're seeing this shift towards more targeted therapeutics coming through in that pipeline. There will be that need. For PACE, our second funding round will be focused on supporting diagnostic approaches. Coming later on this year, there's not much more I can say on that at the moment, but we absolutely recognise the needs around supporting the whole picture, antimicrobials and diagnostics. And that there's also another, just to mention, great series of workshops and events being run via the NHS around demand signalling in diagnostics at the moment, to understand the greatest areas of needs and where those points of intervention in the care pathway could be made around diagnostics. So that's another thing that I think will also help to flow the funding in the areas where there's most need and the most chance of securing adoption.
Perfect. And I've got 2 international questions. I'm not sure who feels on the panel best placed to take these. So one is a question on the US Pasteur Act. Been in the US, John, I don't know whether you could answer that one. How soon might this come? Perhaps you could touch on what is the Pasteur Act and how soon might it come?
Yeah, sure. So the Pasteur Act, and it's an acronym that spells Pasteur, but touches on that, and it's a very subscription based model, and so that they have seen the need to de-link volume and value, which Nick touched on, and again credit to NICE and NHS for really being global trailblazers in this effort. So it was introduced actually in the previous Congress 3 years ago. It was reintroduced at the beginning of last year, and it is awaiting action. I think if people have kind of been following the headlines in the United States, it's a bit of a challenge for the US Congress just to get the basic actions voted on, let alone to introduce a new concept, such as this. But the good news is it's got several dozen co-sponsors. It is a bipartisan, supported bill, so it's not one side pushing an agenda. It's got, a fair amount of support. I think I would like to hope that there's a chance between now and the end of the calendar year, it could be part of a legislative package. If it is not voted on this year, there will be a new Congress that sits in the beginning of January, and then the bill would have to be reintroduced and go through the various health committees and subcommittees to get to a vote. But yeah, I'd just like to hope that it can get voted on between now and the end of this calendar year.
Perfect. And I think that touches on another question that's coming from someone that perhaps, Nick, you might know the answer to, which is, you talked about the UK having its fair share, and obviously, something's happening in the US. What perhaps you could touch on, who else is stepping up to the plate with their fair share? What else is going on?
Yeah, so there is a lot of interest in this whole area, and the potentially step change is the Pasteur Act. So if the Pasteur Act does sort of get through, then I think that'll be big enough to make a real difference, even as an initial as a single sort of initiative. And one of the issues, of course, is making sure that these if we're paying fair share type approaches, then there also needs to be a lot of alignment of these pull incentives so that they do actually align, and collectively you get a big enough global pull incentive. But there is quite a lot going on. So there was a study through the Council of Canadian Academies, which reported last year, and I think that's very much being used to try to do something in Canada. And the EU is doing a lot of really good work in this area now, and there's really heightened interest in something that could work at EU level as well as within the individual member states. There's been some really good work in Sweden and Norway. A lot of the focus initially in Sweden and Norway was more about securing access to existing novel antibiotics, and even securing supply chains of other existing antimicrobials. But I think more recently they've been trying to sort of stimulate sort of investment as well. So I think there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's quite encouraging. My one sort of proviso, my one sort of concern is that you have to pay enough for these to really work. So and I think there are two separate problems, and we sometimes confuse the two. So I think one problem is sort of robust supply chains of existing antibiotics, and at least making it worthwhile companies launching existing antibiotics in some territories. So they're very important issues, and certainly worth solving, and very important to solve. But of course, the amount of money going into these incentives to achieve that wouldn't necessarily be enough to not only achieve those objectives, but then to encourage people to actually invest more in new antibiotics. So I think we do have to be really sort of honest with ourselves and you know and sort of focus on making sure that these incentives are big enough as well as aligned so that we do end up with this global pull incentive for investment in antimicrobials.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. I've got another question for John. You mentioned obviously that the bigger companies that have their own resources perhaps, you know, wouldn't be your target for investment from the AMR Action Fund. But someone has asked, you know, can smaller listed companies like an AIM listed company, are they eligible, or do they all have to be private companies for the AMR Action Fund?
You know, each investment opportunity is evaluated individually, right? So there aren't, you know, really hard and fast rules. Again, as opposed to just saying a broad statement of yes, the larger companies who again have access to capital, we don't look at them. But if anyone wants to go to you know, our website, there is a you know, contact the investment team tab there, and they can you know, go and reach out. And the investment team, I mean, the investment team has talked to truly hundreds of companies all across the globe at various stages you know, of development, and so they're happy to you know, learn more about some of the exciting you know, science that's out there. And yeah, if it's, you know, worthy of investment, again, we have an independent scientific advisory board that really, you know, digs into the benefit to the patient, and you know, kind of understands about the, you know, the mechanisms of action, everything, and then it moves to the investment team. But the investment team helps get those opportunities through the scientific advisory board in the beginning.
Okay, thanks for that. And then sort of two parallel questions for Debs. So I guess one of the sort of overarching question is, you know, you must be very encouraged by the new sources of funds and the initiatives that you're seeing, and that could probably have made your life very different at the early stages of Nova Biotechs. But thinking of the climate now and looking ahead, you know, do you feel, you know, what are the challenges and opportunities for UK biotech in the antimicrobial area? You know, and does being in the UK, is that an advantage? Is it a challenge? You know, could you put it into the context of UK biotech?
Yeah, so some great points, Sue, and you're right. I would say, you know, the ecosystem for antimicrobial R&D has improved, you know, so much, which is a huge positive, certainly since I founded Nova Biotechs, and you know, we started off in the early stages of our program's development. I think that the challenges of being in the UK are the same for any company and anybody focusing on AMR pretty much. I think the opportunities now are that improvement in the ecosystem, access to funding, things being a bit more joined up. And, you know, Bev touched on a focus of funding that isn't just about funding and running. We're building capacity, skills, and hopefully refilling those gaps in R&D skills that Bev touched on, which is great. And obviously everything that Nick's touched on, having you know, the potential to connect with payers as well, and that joined up approach. I think what's important with the task force is obviously that patient perspective coming into it as well. I think that's all part of the AMR ecosystem and community. So I honestly wouldn't say there are particular challenges for any company in this space being based in the UK, but certainly lots of opportunities now, and more than there ever have been. I think we're very outward looking as well, that there's lots of things that are going on in terms of missions and UK companies going out to the US, going out to Europe as well through Innovate UK. So that's all good stuff. And yeah, the challenges around, you know, the funding and advancing your assets beyond early stage are the same as they are for a company based anywhere.
Yeah, thank you. And an interesting question that's just come in is, so the EU is looking at transferable exclusivity vouchers. I don't know who on the panel feels they know about that particular scheme and whether that should be something that the UK looks at as well. If you'd like to pick that one up.
I'll take a stab, and maybe Nick, you have a thought as well. So the transferable exclusivity extension voucher is part of the it's part of the pharmaceutical legislation that was just passed by the European Parliament. But it's not fully enacted yet. It needs to go to the Commission and get all of the member states to actually have a vote on it. But it's what Brussels decided was the best pull incentive that they could come up with. And so what that does basically is, if a developer like, you know, Deb comes up with an idea, they would you know, submit it, and the company would receive the voucher, which then most likely would get sold to another typically larger company who could benefit from having an extended period of patent exclusivity. And it would be in that transaction that a smaller company would basically get rewarded for the innovation that was developed, as opposed to, you know, kind of giving something, and as you know, Nick has explained, in the UK system, where you're you know, rewarding the developer, you know, directly, and there's no, you know, kind of transaction that comes with the subscription.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Yeah, and so just to add, I mean, I think there's limited things that can actually be done at sort of full EU level rather than member state sort of level. So I think the sort of, you know, the options available at EU level are, you know, are relatively limited. So I can see that the, you know, the exclusivity voucher approach is at least something that can be done at sort of European level. Now, just on the second part of the question around you know, doing it in the UK, well, I mean, you wouldn't do that and the subscription model, I don't think. And I think if you're talking about a sort of a UK health system, and we've got the subscription model approach up and running and working well, you certainly wouldn't need to do vouchers on top of that. And I guess the one advantage of the subscription model is that you've got a lasting solution to that sort of broken market for that sort of drug. I mean, theoretically, you know, with the exclusivity voucher, you could sell it, great big sort of influx of cash, but then sort of, you know, a few years later, you know, the market's still broken, and there's not really any great incentive for maintaining that product on the market. So I think within the context of a UK scheme, I think what we're doing with the subscription model is actually a much better solution. But I do have sympathies for European friends, given that you know, the responsibilities for healthcare systems are member state owned, and there's limited things that can be actually done at a EU level.
I think that what's good about both the voucher and the subscription, though, it, you know, rewards success, you know, right? That this isn't, you know, governments, you know, providing grants early on for a product that may or may not, you know, be successful. I think in both cases, you know, you lay out criteria that is meant to be kind of a North Star that companies and you know, researchers, you know, can aim for and you know, pursue, but no money changes hands until you have proven, and gotten the appropriate regulatory approvals and everything. And so I think any scheme that rewards success is the right one. And what it does is it brings back the market principles, right, and lets different investors, kind of place their bets on different technologies and different companies, and it operates the way a normal marketplace for oncology or rare disease or any area, cardiovascular, let the market sort out what is the right answer and where the best kind of technology is, and again the money should kind of flow accordingly then.
Thanks, John. I think Sue's just had to drop off. But yeah, thank you all very much for your questions and answers today. It's been a great discussion. And we look forward to discussing some of these issues more with all of you. It's obviously, as you can see, a very busy time in the AMR space and lots of progress being made. And the BIA has recently updated its infographic on AMR, which you can now find on our website. Here we go. We'll shortly be sharing a slide on this. There we go, thanks. So yeah, if you want to find out more about AMR, then do have a look on BIA website at biohistory.org/AMR. And do get in touch as well. We're always keen to hear from members about this topic and see how we can work together on those pull, push and nudge elements of tackling this issue. Here's some upcoming BI events. So if you are interested in engaging with us more, then do have a look at these on our website and book your tickets. Hope to see you at some of these soon. And you can also hear more from us by signing up to Newscast. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your time today and see you soon.